Holy guacamole! He's the master of cooking and all things wine in the Netflix series Queer Eye, and he's won his way into our hearts one avocado at a time. He also has a brand new cookbook, Antoni in the Kitchen, coming out September 9th. His name is Antoni, and he's about to be exposed. Are you ready?
Dum dum dum!
Dun, dun, dun.
Let's do it.
Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Wonderful kitchen. We're in West Hollywood, and this home is listed by Jonathan London. So let's get started with Little Antoni. I want to know about Little Antoni. We're going to go back in time, and you were born and raised in Quebec.
Born and raised in Quebec. So Quebec's the province, Montreal. My parents were my mother was born in Warsaw, my father was born in Belgium, but he spent most of his life in Canada. And so child of immigrants. So you ended up eventually moving to West Virginia. Yes. I don't talk about that as much. I was there for 4 years on and off before returning to Montreal. Did you like West Virginia? I did. It was very different. I would say the landscape is beautiful, great scenery. I met some friends that I'm still in touch with to this day. And it was a nice place to be young and just sort of grow up, a lot of wilderness. Outdoor sports, that sort of thing. Yeah. When you were younger, what was like your dreams and aspirations? When you were younger, what did you want to be when you grew up? When I was younger, I think when I started actually thinking about a career, it would be when I was probably in university, when I was studying psychology, and I really wanted to be a therapist. Oh, wow. Yeah. You wanted to help people with their problems. Help people with their problems, but I think also figure out my own. I had a lot of existential angst. I still have a lot of existential angst. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of figure myself out and like the motivations behind what I do and like the age-old question of nurture versus nature or vice versa, and like the relationship between the two and just trying to figure myself out. So it's like a nice dance between narcissism and self-reflection and trying to help other people, I guess. That's really cool, but you're kind of doing that now with Queer Eye. Like you are helping people, you kind of are a little baby therapist. And it's like and that's the crazy part is like often in life you get what you need and not necessarily what you want. After university, I moved to New York and I studied theater for 2 years at the neighborhood playhouse. And while I still do have those aspirations, my focus was really on myself, on how I was perceived by other people. And with Queer Eye, basically what we have is a service job. We're there and we go and we help other people. We bring our own personal story into it as well, and we have that conversation, but it's sort of, it's not at all like what I wanted or like what I fantasized about, but I got sort of like something that was a lot more fulfilling and kind of gave me a sense of purpose in life. So when you were in New York and you're going on these auditions, were you waiting tables? Is that how you got into the cooking? Yeah, so my first, I'm trying to think of my first ever job was, but I've been working in restaurants for somewhere between 9 and 11 years. Wow. From like a busboy in Montreal at a place called Buonanotte, which was kind of like a supper club. It was like the restaurant that turned into like a bottle service situation, where there was a lot of like Italian food, to working at a family-run Polish restaurant, which is where I like fell back in love with Polish food. A place called Stash Cafe where my father worked as a waiter when he was a student, both my sisters, all of my cousins. It's like the rite of passage for all Polish people in Montreal, basically, to work at this restaurant. And then when I moved to New York, I was at Fatty Crab, a restaurant that now unfortunately doesn't exist anymore, specializing in Malaysian food, which actually, brilliant little segue, I have a little homage to it in my cookbook coming out. That's awesome. They had Malaysian, it was a chili crab. And I thought because it's not available anymore, I wanted people to continue making this recipe. So I have my own version of it. That's awesome. Yeah. So you're pursuing acting, you're waiting tables, you start getting into a little bit more of the cooking aspect of things, and then you end up somehow being, a personal assistant to the original Queer Eye Ted Allen? How did that happen? One of my closest friends, PJ Vogt, we actually studied acting together in Montreal. He moved to New York to work for NPR, and we lived together. We were roommates, and he mentioned, like, you know what, you're going to be living in Clinton Hill. He was one of those people who, you know how you have people in life sometimes who sort of like try to steer you in a certain direction and try to nurture your passions, but I'm also a very stubborn person and I wasn't really ready to lean into it because cooking was always something that was so personal and intimate to me. And he was like, I really feel like you should do something with like food and TV. It's like, you should follow the career of Ted Allen. He's like the OG on Queer Eye for the Straight Guy. very successful, if not the #1 show on Food Network, Chopped. And he's like, I feel like you guys would get along. He's a journalist, very curious about food, not a chef, just like a food expert, somebody who's inherently passionate and curious about food. And he's like, I feel like he's someone who could teach you a lot of things. And PJ knows that I've always loved mentors, and I've always had somebody sort of like helping steer me in the right direction, because I can be a little hapless on my own. I think we all can. We all kind of need mentors. So I went to Ted's book signing for In My Kitchen, and met him. We got along really well, and then we became friends, and then he needed help. The first time that I actually worked for him was he had beehives on the roof of his brownstone, as one does when you're Ted Allen. And he was basically like packaging them, and they didn't want to sell them, but they wanted to give them away to friends, and they didn't know what to do. So he and his husband Barry hired me as a personal assistant to like mail those out as like presents for.
You mailed out beehives?
No, not beehives. Honey from the beehives.
Okay, I was like,
not clear about that. Yeah, he trusted me. So we packaged the honey and mailed it out to a bunch of people, and then they realized like, wow, we could use some help with logistics, not only in Ted's business, but also his husband, who was starting a mid-century modern furniture gallery, like specializing in Italian and American designers from the 40s, 50s, and 60s and 70s. So I kind of like helped both of them and worked for both of them, and then I got poached by a gallerist in the city who was dealing with Art Deco, and I've always loved Art Deco as well. So I worked as a gallery director for this other guy for about 2 years, and then Queer Eye came about, which was kind of strange. Like I didn't realize it at the time, but working for Ted was preparing me for the career that I have now. Just even helping with like scheduling and understanding the ins and the outs of the business.
Yeah.
Which is, it's kind of crazy. Like in life sometimes, you know, you go and you have this plan of this thing that you want to do, and things don't, well, at least for me, they never work out the way that I thought that they would. But then when you kind of look back, it's sort of like, oh yeah, it totally makes sense. When I think of all the years that I spent in restaurants, being around food, never in the kitchen, because I'm not a chef, I'm home taught and I'm a home cook, but always sort of like being on the sidelines of it and sort of observing and having opinions and studying and like being in the environment, in the periphery. It kind of set me up for the life that I have now.
That's pretty cool. And you end up getting Queer Eye. How did you end up getting that? Like, well, how did that come about?
So I had a, actually, so it's in large part so when I was Ted's assistant, his agent's assistant and I were both helping like plan our boss's schedules. Mm-hmm. His name was Ben Levine. And so when he became a junior agent was right when Queer Eye came along. And when I found out about the show, I actually contacted him and I was like, hey, have you heard of Queer Eye being rebooted for Netflix? They want a diverse cast, turning the red states pink. Like I loved everything about it, but I was also very fearful for a lot of reasons. And I was like, do you want to help me with this? So I was like one of his first contracts ever. And we sort of like, he like pitched me for the show and went in for it. And it was like a long, arduous process which basically started out with an audition tape where I just had like a simple meet and greet sort of via Skype with one of the casting directors at ITV. And we set it up. I did it from Ted's kitchen.
Wow.
And it was supposed to be like 20 to 30 minutes. And we were on there for about an hour and a half, just talking about life and food and my experience and how like food just somehow ties into everything in life. Because I think it does for everybody. It's like you remember the first meal that you had with somebody who you're in a relationship with, or like food that you had around your family's table. It doesn't matter whether you had a nice upbringing or a really shitty one. It's like we all have those stories.
Brings everybody together too.
It brings everybody together. When you're a broke student and you can't go to restaurants, you invite everybody over for a big bowl of pasta, and it's like it's how we connect. When you're a student as well and you're studying, it's like you have friends over and you do your little study groups, or at least I did. And so it's always been just at the center of everything, and it's an incredibly emotional thing for me. And I think they caught on to like how passionate I was about it. Got invited to LA, it was my first time here. And we went through just several days of putting 5 of us in a room together, and they would like show us a slideshow of images of like a guy wearing Crocs, and we would comment on it. And I met a whole bunch of really interesting folks, intimidated definitely because there were actual chefs who were auditioning for the part as well. And as somebody who's very familiar with imposter syndrome, I know a lot of people are, I was thinking like, wow, I'm not cut out for this. But when I started to realize like the pool's getting smaller and smaller, I was like, okay, they're actually considering me. Like there actually may be a chance for this. I went in trying not to care, and by the end of it, I was like, I think I really it wasn't that I want this, it was like, I think that I need this.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like what I went in with. And what was very obvious as well was what was very different than the auditioning process for traditional scripted series. You're playing a character, but for this they were just asking me to be myself, which in some ways can be a lot harder to do than mask yourself behind something
100.
else. But there was also freedom, because it was like, if they don't like me, they don't like me, and there's nothing I can do about that. So I decided to just kind of go in and be my weird self who gets bug-eyed when he starts talking about the virtues of cheese. Yeah.
So it's the first season of Queer Eye, and one thing that I think a lot of people noticed was your fascination with avocados. You also had a little bit of like making smaller dishes. I guess my question to you is, do you feel like you making smaller dishes took away from your capabilities of what you can actually do in the kitchen?
Smaller dishes as in like more simplistic recipes?
Yes, correct.
First of all, the avocados. Those episodes were not shot in succession, in my defense.
That you'll be here beside me.
Yes, I did choose to use the wonderful beloved millennial fruit twice in 16 episodes, but they decided to air those in succession, so that's not on me. But that said, I think it would have been, if I started doing something that was complex, it's kind of like, I kind of equate it to, if I walk into, I'm gonna relate it to politics, but bear with me, there is a point.
Okay.
If I, like, there was one hero who had a Trump banner on his front lawn and he had guns in his house. Two things that make me very uncomfortable, especially the guns, even more so than the banner, because I'm Canadian and we, for the most part, don't do guns. Makes us much uncomfortable. If I addressed that from the beginning, it would have been a missed opportunity. And I just try to focus on like how best I can help the person. Same goes with the food. I know what I know about food. I'm confident about it. I don't think that I know everything either. I'm an inherently curious person.
Exactly.
I think that's been like, that's why I love to learn, and I constantly have questions, and I love chefs, and I love hanging out with them and going to restaurants and cooking by myself and messing up dishes and being successful at them and hosting dinner parties. But it's like a constant learning thing. But that said, it's like, you can't walk in and try to teach somebody something that's extremely complicated, because it's a missed opportunity to try to get them to relate to the food. I would go a little more complicated with somebody who did have an interest in food already, where then you can really focus on technique. But then with other people, like some people tell me that they don't care about food and they'll basically eat, like if you ask them if they want to have like a grilled salmon with broccoli rabe and crispy garlic chips and chili flakes and a bit of honey on there, or a granola bar, they're like, well, what's easier?
Exactly.
And it's like, so those people don't really care. So for them, it's really figuring out like that emotional attachment, or just like that, what's the in getting them excited about cooking?
Yeah.
Like a reason for it.
Yeah, exactly.
As opposed to the actual food itself.
Kind of like slowly bringing them in, so then that way they can expand their
And you want them
knowledge.
to remember it as well too. It's, you know, I did get a lot of hate in the first season, and it really hurt at first, because I'm always, I cared a lot about what people think about me, and in some ways I still do. But that's the good thing about public life, is that it's actually impossible to have everyone love you. So it's the perfect lesson in just like remembering to stay in your own lane. But when we started filming seasons 3 and 4 in Kansas City, the ideas that I had for the first recipes, our exec, Jen Laner, as we call her, Mama Bear, came up to me and she was like, Aunt, and she took me to the side after our first production meeting, and she was like, don't listen to them. You're going way too complicated. Like, these people make sandwiches. You have to keep it, like, we got to focus on like why we're actually here. It's not your ego. It's not you jerking off your skills. It's like you helping this person, which I'm so glad that she reminded me. Because at the end of the day, it's not about us. It's about trying to be like a messenger. And we use our verticals, like our specialties, to sort of get to like deeper, more meaningful conversations.
And like you said, like you try to like form people to be a better version of themselves,
Right.
ultimately. Has there been a moment on the show that has actually made you a better person?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. If I bring it back down to even the beginning, there are two that I want to talk about. I'll start with one and I'll try not to belabor it. But when we met with AJ, who was the young man who wanted to come out to his stepmom, and his father passed away. That was in season 1, episode 4. When Antoni Sr. passed, did your relationship with AJ, did you guys get closer to each other?
We got closer.
You know, he told me, you know, take care of our day and make sure, you know, she doesn't have any problems.
When the show started, I don't know why, but I had this conversation with myself and even with the producers, and I was like, I'm not talking about sexuality. because I'm fluid and I always get super people confused when I talk about it, and it's just not something that I want to address. Meanwhile, I'm on like literally the gayest show in the world and they're asking to talk about our personal lives, so I don't know what the hell I was thinking. But when the opportunity came about to actually have that discussion with AJ, where, you know, some of my castmates were like, we realized that we all had very different coming outs, and where I didn't have a traditional one. Like I never really had the whole like announcement to my parents. It was just sort of like, well, I'm dating a girl and now I'm dating a guy.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm dating a girl again. And that was it. And here's this person who I care about. And if they mean enough to me, I'm going to introduce them to you. And with AJ, it was just sort of, I think I gained a newfound sense of confidence in my sexuality. Even though I always felt like I was really comfortable, where I was like, I don't have to explain myself to people. But when I look back, it's like I've worked so many jobs where it was assumed that I was straight and I never corrected anybody, and I had opportunities to tell them, but I didn't. And sometimes I think it was just like, oh, well, the lazy answer was like, oh, well, I don't want to have to explain myself. But at the same time, it was like, oh, well, I don't want their perception of me in case their perception of me changes. And I'm also a little shit disturber, and I like to keep people guessing sometimes, which is harder to do these days with the life that I have, but I'm still inherently a bit of a troublemaker. So, but yeah, it was an opportunity to just sort of be the same version of myself in different circumstances. Whereas before I used to really compartmentalize. And we touched on that with, oh my gosh, with Neil Reddy, Saving Sasquatch episode. Making jokes. It's something that you do a lot.
Do you make a lot of jokes?
You know this.
I'm not one of those people that's like, what, you like to cover up awkwardness with humor? Yeah, I do that.
I'm really remembering names today, and I'm usually very bad. I'm the worst at this usually. So I had 8 hours of sleep last night, so I feel very rested and cool, calm, and collected. But with Neil, where we discussed being the same person wherever you go. Like there's such a comfort in there, and not having to change the way that you move or dress, or even things that you talk about, or certain things that you don't want to discuss with certain people, whether you're at workplace or a family function. And for sure, we're all chameleons in a sense, where we adapt to our environments. But it is a lot easier to go through life, and a lot less stressful to just kind of be that same version of yourself with just little tweaks along the way. So I think that was probably one of the first big important lesson that I got from Queer Eye.
And I think that that's such a good thing too. Like you guys are teaching people how to be a better version of themselves. You're teaching America, hey, like not everybody, you know, is the exact same as what you are. Mm-hmm. People have so many different, you know, personalities and sexualities, and so many different things. And I think that's been such a great part, especially, you know, in today's political climate, and especially in today of the cultural climate of America. I think that that's really needed.
Yeah.
And then you guys get some Emmys. I mean, where's your Emmy?
So it's the show that's been nominated, and people are constantly asking like, where's our fancy toilet paper holder? No. You know what? Honestly, last year we got 4, and I was so excited, especially for our casting department, which is almost all female run. And Ali Capriotti Grant, who's one of the fabulous casting directors, she was the one who gave me my first interview. And this is like young girls, some of them it's their first job doing casting, and like to get an Emmy is just freaking awesome. When we celebrated our nominations this year, we're actually filming, and it was actually a shoot day. And we were in the trailer, and we all sort of like got the news together, and we got to celebrate with the entire production. And I think that's an important reminder as well, because yes, we are the face of the show, but there are so many people who are involved. Not only the fact that there are 3 companies, Netflix, ITV, and Scout Productions, who like originally produce the show, but like the grips and the assistants and the PAs, and it's like, it takes so many people to sort of like create this story, to make us look good, to make the hero, like editors, like it's just the list is endless. So the fact that we've actually even like added to the nominations. We went from 4 to 6 this year.
Crazy.
Like that's nuts.
That's nuts. That must make you feel good though.
It makes me feel good. I don't need a trophy for it.
Yeah, you can have a candle.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
So in season 3, episode 2, you did mention that you had a little bit of a struggle with addiction before.
Mm-hmm.
I was drinking a lot, and that resulted in some serious problems.
I have like a very intimate relationship with addiction, and I know what it's like.
What led you to actually speaking out about that, and how did you end up getting to the point where you are today, like, you know, not having that addiction?
Yeah, I think that I still do have the addiction. For me personally, I can only speak from my experience, and I know that the journey with which people sort of like go through in dealing with that is very specific. But again, it was one of those things where I was like, I'm not going to talk about this. Because it's tricky, right? Like, we're on a show that asks us to be vulnerable. We're connecting with people who are opening up to us. So it'd be very hypocritical if we didn't open up about our own experiences. Right. And we didn't have that information on that hero, on, his name was Joe, right? Joey. When he was telling us that he battled with addiction, that came up on camera. And that for me was like, I use God in a spiritual sense, where it was like, whatever that higher power is, was just kind of basically saying like, okay, now it's time to talk about this. If I didn't share my story, I would have felt pretty shitty afterwards. Yeah. And it is something that's intimate, so I only talk about it to a certain extent, but I knew what his struggle was like. And even though our circumstances were very different, I think that the feelings are the same, and that's kind of what unites us. And that's why you can watch somebody who's a staunch Republican and still relate to them, because we all have we all have the same feelings. I mean, with me, it really came to a point where I have an addictive personality, and sometimes that manifests itself in a good way, and sometimes not such a good way.
Feel you 100%.
My 20s were nuts. But I think I came to a point where I have a very good understanding of what depression is like, and a lot of like mental health stuff, particularly in my 20s. And I think I came to a point where what switched for me was that I knew very well what it was like to be depressed. And when I'm in a bad mood, or if I'm sad, I tend to wallow in it. Like, I'll listen to the sad song, light the candles for days, and I try to get every single drop out of that wet rag as I can. I'm not one of those like, let go of it and let it go by. But there was one morning that I woke up, and for the first time in my life, I actually felt nothing. And that was the scariest thing of all, because I'm also a very sensitive person, and I love to smile as much as I love to cry. I probably like to cry a little more. I'm a happy, sad boy. But when I didn't feel anything, that was the most terrifying thing ever, because I just felt completely flatlined. And I decided to reach out with somebody who I knew sort of went through a similar thing, who I'd shared with a couple of years prior, because it was something that I knew I was going to be ready for eventually, but didn't know to what capacity or how I wanted to go about it. And then I had a really honest conversation with her, and she helped me, and I made a decision, and I made a choice that day. And it's something that is ongoing. It's not like I made a decision and it went away and now I'm like cured. It's part of me, but it's kind of like my emotional vulnerability is something that I always felt was a weakness when I was growing up, because like boys, you don't feel like boys are always supposed to cry. We live in a world where it's different right now, where yes, you have certain political leaders who don't encourage that, but then you have like Canadian prime ministers who are comfortable with that. So we're on the up and up. But where I realized that instead of seeing my vulnerability as a liability, it was sort of like, oh, it's an asset and it's part of me, so I might as well start embracing that. Just like social anxiety as well. It was something that used to stress me out, and it would cripple me from actually going out and being in social environments. But now I realize, like, okay, it's here, it's my friend. Is it strong today or is it weak?
Exactly.
And if it's strong, I'm going to figure out how to deal with it, and I'm going to go to the party for 40 minutes. If it's weak, I'll last 2 hours.
Yeah.
You adapt.
But that's really good that you have learned to adapt, because I think that that's a big struggle too. And then also having people that you can count on, especially like when it involves your mental health, when it involves anything with addiction, anything like that, like having somebody to count on is the biggest thing in the world, and not being afraid.
Yes. And knowing that you're not the only one going through that. You're not the first person to experience whatever it is that you're experiencing. It's like, even with something like Fame, I remember I was walking through Union Square Park right when the show came out, and I got to the gym, and then I got on Twitter, and somebody posted a photo and put my location from behind at Union Square, like just 3 minutes prior, and I freaked out. Yeah. I went to my therapist after, and I was basically telling her like how unsafe I felt, and like I was thinking like, do I need to have a security person around me? And she was like, calm down. You're not the first person to experience this. Thousands of people have it. It's new and it's different, and your feelings are very valid, but like, you're gonna be fine. Exactly. And by like just speaking to somebody else, even if it's a friend, anybody with an empathetic ear, and words of kindness, and just anybody who's gentle with you and allows you to be gentle with yourself, I think reminds us that we're never alone in whatever it is that we're struggling with. No matter how weird or how lonely you may feel, there's always someone else.
Yeah. And you mentioned the Fame, and like that kind of came out of nowhere, you know, for you're going from one thing to end up, posing in your underwear on, gay times and stuff.
Yeah.
Do you consider yourself a sex symbol?
I'm not going to be naive and pretend like I don't engage in that part of my image, but it's something that it's very entertaining for me. My intention for it, I think everything for me, like my big message with everything that I do, whether it's an endorsement or posing in my underwear, whether it's with a photographer or with like a brand deal like Tom Ford for underwear, it's always checking my intentions, and it's figuring out like, why am I doing what I'm doing? If I'm doing something because I want some kind of purely just for validation and because I want attention, then I know that I call that McDonald's syndrome. It feels good for 5 minutes. It's like watching bad reality TV, and then you feel like garbage, and then you want more. Or is there something else with it? I think that's the part, like what I was referencing earlier, the fact that I'm a bit of a troublemaker. The sex symbol part is that, because I feel like I am kind of conservative. My parents are European, and we've always been sort of like, we talked about sex very openly, but it wasn't anything that was like super precious. But there is something like, there's a purity to Queer Eye where we're like, not innocent, because I think we do open up and we're very honest, but that's just kind of like, it's like another muscle that I get to flex in like a different part. It's like kind of like having a restaurant or writing the cookbook. Exactly. It's just like, it's like a fun little thing to lean into every once in a while.
Yeah.
I try to balance it out.
Yeah.
It's like I've had studied psychology, worked as a gallery director, as a busboy, assistant for Ted Allen. I like to do a lot of things. Yeah. I like a nice big web.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you could just jump from one strand to the next every once in a while.
Exactly. And like when opening that up too allows you to, have different creative outlets and be able to like express yourself.
And it's fun. Ways. It's a more superficial side, but it's like I take care of myself, and health and wellness is something that's very important. And
you're gonna need those pictures when you get 80 years old, and you're gonna be like, that looked
when
good
I'm like
then.
A weird 80-year-old man, hopefully living in Rome. I really want to have a gut by then and just like not give a shit. And I'm just gonna have like photos of myself in my 30s in underwear. It's quite the picture. But yeah.
So one of your Queer Eye castmates, Jonathan Van Ness, you guys have been having a little romantic relationship on social media, but you guys have debunked it. But if you had to date one of your Queer Eye co-stars, who would it be?
If I actually had to date one of my castmates, my physical and psychological and emotional well-beings must be preserved. And so in fear of being very hurt in a real way by Jonathan, if I didn't say him, I feel like my life would be in jeopardy. So I'm gonna say Jonathan Van Ness. Also because I love him.
Yeah.
I love everyone equally in different ways.
But you guys always look like you're having a good time.
Well, he brings out, I think, that kid in me who I don't think that I knew of any gay friends when I was in elementary school. And there's something very childlike about our relationship. Like we took a flight yesterday. Tan was on that flight as well. And it's like we're sitting in each other's laps halfway through the flight, everyone's sleeping, and we're laughing, like throwing food at each other and like messing with each other's hair. And I never thought that at the age of 35 that I would like hold hands interlocked. Like I never did with a girl or guy show any PDA. And with these guys, it's like we just like, there's something very childlike about our friendship that's kind of, that I never thought that I would be that person, and that I kind of wish I was a little more of that and a little more unguarded when I was a kid. Yeah. And so I kind of get to live that now. And it makes no sense, but it makes all the sense in the world to us.
So speaking of your relationship status, are you single, taken?
I am single and not available.
Oh, that's very interesting. Okay.
That's my way of basically, I'm pathologically codependent, and I've always sort of lost myself in the relationships that I've been in, and I've sort of like always been, I'm like a frog that goes from like one lily pad to the next. Yeah. And so I'm just doing my best now to just kind of be with myself and see what that's like. I was speaking to a friend of mine who's an actor, and he encountered a lot of success when he was very young and has somehow managed to sustain that career. And I was telling him, he was like, well, how are you dealing with, public life? And I was like, well, I'm just doing my best not to change. Yeah. And I don't want to change. And his answer to that was like, well, that's bullshit, because everything about your life has changed, and you have to adapt. You have to understand. You can't pretend that when you walk into a space that people aren't looking at you. If you act like it's not happening, then you're being like weirdly precious about it, and there's an arrogance and a denial that comes with that, as opposed to like accepting that like this is the new normal. And some days are going to be harder than others, and it's not about navigating it perfectly, but kind of like really accepting it in a very honest way. So I'm only starting to realize now like what I like to do when I'm alone at home, and like lighting candles and shows that I want to watch. It was always about making the other person happy and making sure that they don't leave me because I never want to be abandoned. Oh God, it's a therapy session. I kind of want to know what it's like to be with myself. It's like life is camp these days where I'm surrounded by people all the time, and then at the end of the day, I'm with myself. So I'm just trying to see what that's like.
Look at you. This hair. This is crazy. What? She's a woman.
You recently did a video with Miss Cracker, and she put you in drag.
I love her.
And after seeing yourself in drag, would you ever consider doing that or being on RuPaul's Drag Race?
Would I revisit it in some way, shape, or form? Absolutely. It was a lot. I really only thought about the superficial change before doing that piece with them. And it really, I got weirdly emotional, just like, there was something about this moment when because I didn't see myself at all during that process. They really didn't let me, not for a second, see what I look like. And she kept on telling me like, oh, put your shoulders back more. And I was like, I wasn't fully understanding it and like ribs in, because it was kind of like this corseted, slightly corseted situation. She's like, don't worry, honey. When you see yourself in front of the mirror, you're gonna change. And then I saw myself, and at first I was like this, like ogre-like, and then I was like, oh God, this is what I stand. And then suddenly I started changing my posture, and I was like, oh, this is with the chin down, like this thing is where you're kind of like, you have the curve of like a stallion, of like a horse. And it just kind of, it was like, oh wow. I don't know, yeah, I got weirdly, not weirdly because I always get emotional, but under the right circumstances, I think I would revisit it because there's more to be explored there. Just in terms of like gender lines and sort of the way that I present myself. Again, like growing up, it was just always assumed that I was just fully straight. And I think that we're all adaptable and we can always change. I've definitely changed a lot of, like even the clothing that I wear. I know I'm wearing black and white today, but like I wear brighter colors because I know tan. I paint my toenails because I know Jonathan now. I still bite my regular nails. I haven't, I'm not like a filer nail cutter yet, but like one thing at a time, you know?
Yeah.
So
shortly after your video with Miss Cracker, I saw you in Taylor Swift's music video for You Need to Calm Down. So what was it like working with Taylor, and what do you think of the message of the song?
I love her. I got to meet her for the first time. It was actually at a CA party a year prior. I was really, I'm weirdly intimidated by female comedians and pop stars. And I was like too shy to go up to her. And Ben, the agent who I mentioned, who's like my best friend and agent, we were all at this party together, and I saw her. Ellie Goulding was there as well, and she's just a sight to behold. I mean, her voice is so sweet and pure. And I saw Taylor, and I was like, I got really weird, and Ben was like, what's wrong? I was like, oh, it's Taylor Swift. And he's like, well, come and say hi, because he's not shy to talk to anybody. And so I went, and I was thinking about like, okay, think of 3 smart things to say, because this is like a short moment. You don't know how often in life you're gonna have an interaction with someone like this. And before I could even say anything, she just started like gushing over Queer Eye, which is so nice, because like you meet people who you admire, you listen to their music, whether they're artists or musicians or actresses or whoever. And then when they throw all that energy on you, it's sort of like, oh, I don't have to do the work here. I can just like respond. And then you know, we've hung out a little bit since. We have a mutual friend, and we've had some dinners, and I got to know her. And my real connection to her was we were playing music. I was playing music by The National, and I think it was the song Slow Show, which is my favorite song by them. And she started singing it, like humming it, and I was like, what the fuck? And she's like, oh, I love The National. And I was like, bullshit. And then I would like play a random song like Geese of Beverly Road, and then she was like, that's the lyric. Or I would play one and she would guess which song it was. And I was like, you are as much of a fan as I am.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so we got along in terms of like music taste. And I've always loved her music. It's always very fun, poppy, but I never really, that's not true, because some of the songs I really did listen to and really responded to very well. But it sort of like gave me like a newfound glimpse into like wanting to explore her music even more. So I've sort of gone back and listened to some of the older stuff, and I just think she's immensely talented. I think it's incredible to navigate. I mean, she's on such a different level just with like her global appeal, that the way she navigates it like a pro, and like continues to just be comfortable sharing about her experiences, dating and being in relationships and conveying that into art. It's a difficult thing to do. I don't think everyone's built for that. And I think she does it so well. And just being on that set when she invited us to do the music video, it's such like, you can walk on set sometimes and you can feel when there's sort of like stress and like the tension of like having to get things done. And with her, it was just a very collaborative process. It wasn't like she only spoke to one person. Everyone on that production was coming up to her, asking her questions. You felt like everyone is just sort of working together, where it's just like a nice positive environment, which they often are when women are running it, in my experience. No like shade against guys, but any sort of like a female-centric work environment tends to be more collaborative and less ego, and it's more about like, let's come up with the best product possible.
Now that you have followed in Ted Allen's footsteps and being in Queer Eye, would you ever want to follow down his same trajectory and host a show like Chopped or anything like that?
I would certainly be open to it. I don't know if I have other things that I sort of want to explore. I definitely want to revisit scripted, because that still is one of my passions, and just going into traditional film and TV. But I'm open to it, but I'm not sure. It's something that we're sort of like in process of discussing, of figuring out what that story is. I do know that because like of being on a show like Queer Eye, where it is a service job and there is that heart component, like the emotional component, Queer Eye, Chopped is very entertaining, and there is heart and the backstories of their contestants and everything, but I need that to be part of it.
Correct.
So I'm not 100% sure what that is yet. We're sort of exploring it and kind of like taking meetings and like discussing things, but I'm still, my thing is I don't want to rush, even though I'm a very impatient person, and it's all about like a low, slow burn. There's my food reference.
Yeah.
Of like just taking my time and really doing quality over quantity, and just figuring out like what the next move is.
Yeah.
I want to be passionate about it. I want to go to work every day the way that he does. Like I worked for him, and Ted is up at like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, and he was always excited to go. And that is a man who loves to sleep 8 to 9 hours a day. So I want to find my version of Chopped for me, whatever that is, whether it's similar or completely different.
Well, a potential version of Chopped is your new cookbook.
Antoni in the Kitchen, and it's already on the Amazon bestseller list.
What a segue! So my question to you is, how did this come to be, and how do you even determine what recipes go into a cookbook?
That's a good question. It came to be shortly after the show, after the first 2 seasons came out, and it was right before I moved to Kansas City to shoot seasons 3 and 4. And you don't get to decide on timing a lot in this business, but you do want to sort of like jump on momentum, and I have a platform and I have eyes on me, and I want to tell my story in many different ways, and a lot of that is through food. And so I got an offer for a book. I met with publishers. I really resonated very well with Rux Martin at Houghton Mifflin. She not only looks like Grace Coddington, but she's also very much like her. So I call her the Grace Coddington of the culinary world. And she lives in Vermont, and she's got awesome big ass hair. She's just a legend, and she's so no bullshit. So she paired me with a brilliant co-author, Mindy Fox. Again, I'd love to be surrounded by as many women as possible. And we started, at first I was thinking like, okay, we'll do like a 50 recipe situation. She was like, no, I want 100 recipes. And I was like, I don't even know if I know 100 recipes. I've never even written down a single recipe in my life. Like everything is in my head. I watch a food doc, whether it's like a Netflix special or on PBS or Julia Child or Food Network, whatever it is. And then it just kind of stays in my head. I read cookbooks by like Nigella Lawson. And then I just like, I don't remember, I don't even know what street we're on right now, but like I'll remember a dish that I had when I was 6 years old. Yeah. I just have that memory. It's just, my family's like that as well. My father's the exact same way. And so she was just like, start listing down recipes that you've had. And I was like, well, do we want like a kitchen essentials book? Do we want a Polish heritage situation? Do we want a multicultural? She's like, I don't think it has to be one thing or the other. Just look at it as autobiographical, as like food that's sort of like traveled with you throughout your life. Food that you've had at like Fatty Crab when you worked as a waiter, to like Polish heritage stuff that, recipes that you want to sort of like evolve and elaborate on, food that you made as a student during your study groups. And so before we knew it, we had like almost 120 recipes, and then we had to cut it down and just figure out like which are the strong ones. And the ones that I fought for are the ones always that had the best backstory to them. The only thing that I like doing more than actually developing the recipes, because that was stressful because I work in handfuls, and I'm like, just put a little half handful of this and plop it in there, and that's it. So to actually have to measure it was kind of stressful after 10-hour shoot days. But it was writing the introduction and why this recipe was impactful. I got to touch on like a beautiful 7-year relationship that I had, and like a family who taught me unconditional love. And I didn't even realize it at the time, but I realized like, and I mentioned it in my introduction, it's like a lot of those recipes were tested on that family, unbeknownst to me that they were going to make it to a cookbook. And it's like, I have all these like happy memories, and sometimes they're sad ones, but they're still part of like the fabric that's my life. And like, I want everyone to buy the book. Yes, I think all of that's very important, but I just want people to look at it and be like, it doesn't matter if you're super passionate about food or if you're a freak about it like I am, but just know that like we all have those dishes. Whether it's something that your grandmother made or something that you had like a freaking slice of pizza for $2 after club night that you had with your friends and you had a blast. Like we all have those things. Like with desserts, I don't bake at all.
Okay.
And so I got in touch with all of these like lovely women and a couple of guys in my life who made certain things for me when I was a little kid, and I got to speak to them, and there's some like Polish auntie stuff in there that like they sent me the recipes in Polish and we discussed it over the phone. I got to reconnect with them and catch up after not speaking for like 5 or 6 years. And it's nice because that's what you can do with the recipe. If you know how it was made originally, you can evolve it and adapt it into like a version that suits you and your lifestyle.
So is the book more about cooking and a lot of different ingredients, or could I actually just pick the book up and not know that much about the cooking atmosphere?
I think so. It was edited down. I'm a lot like Ted Allen in this respect. We both overcomplicate things. Mm-hmm. We love complicated recipes. And so that's sort of where like my co-author and my editor come in, where they're like, okay, like your smoked Malden salt, like as great as it is, like let's stick to kosher for this one. Like we want these recipes for people to be able to make them across the country. This isn't just like an LA, New York, like a coastal cookbook. Yeah, editing is hard because it's like sometimes you have to like fight and be like, oh, like this one is really important, or this set of ingredients, and then you make it and you realize like, oh, there's actually a simpler way.
Yeah.
Like the Italians have that figured out. It's like such simplicity. The best sauces have like 3 or 4 ingredients. You just have to know how to treat those ingredients to get them to a good place.
Exactly. What makes your cookbook different than another cookbook on the shelf?
I think just because it's deeply personal. It's basically my story. It offers a glimpse into, you know, Polish food is something that I was ashamed of when I was a kid, when I lived in West Virginia. As lovely a place as that was, it was weird having a weird name and bringing cabbage rolls for lunch, while the other kids had like Oscar Mayer Lunchables, which I envied because I wanted to have that. And they had like Doritos and cans of Coke. And I was ashamed of that food. And then when I started working as a waiter again in a Polish restaurant, suddenly I was like, pierogies are fucking dope. Yeah. And like I love a Polish hunter stew and borscht and like stuff that I just sort of like pushed away and was like, I want nothing to do with this.
Exactly.
I just think it's different because it's deeply personal. And I have my books that are like sort of very technical where I get my lessons from, but for me, if there's an emotional bond to something, not only in terms of like, it's great because, you know, fans will get to continue to get to know me and what my story is, but I really want people to be inspired to kind of like look at their own lives and like try to figure out like what's their own version of that.
It's nice.
And sometimes you have to hear somebody else's story to get inspired to change your own.
Exactly.
The way that people watch Queer Eye and get inspired by the heroes. Everything is always full circle. There's always some kind of like there's always a through line.
So wrapping everything up, my question to you is, what is the biggest misconception of Antoni?
That's a difficult question because while I feel like I'm pretty self-aware and I'm constantly working on myself and like trying not to be in too much of a bubble, I am very detached of press and of that sort of thing. Because if you take the good, you have to take the bad. And I still haven't figured that out, how to be good at that. So I just kind of like, I have people who will like relay certain messaging every once in a while. But what people don't get is, you know what, the biggest misconception? I always want to appear smart, and I'm very careful in how I formulate my sentences most of the time, because I never want people to think that I'm dumb. Because I think people will often confuse being spacey and a little aloof, which I am, because I'm always thinking about something. Because I do have like pretty severe ADHD, that people think that I'm dumb. And I don't know if it's a misconception or if it's my own insecurity and it's something that I'm working on, but I often find that like any opportunity to flex like a literary reference or something where it's sort of like, I want you to know I'm not a complete idiot, but then you'll be talking to me and being like, what street are you on? Like, I have no idea, are we in LA? Where I get sensitive about people confusing aloofness with not being intelligent. That's like a very honest answer. I don't think I've ever said that anywhere before.
That's a good answer.
Like that's something that kind of like really drives me sometimes. And I'm just like, you know what? It doesn't matter. People are going to have their opinions. You're not going to make everybody happy. Just stay in your own lane.
Yeah. And my last question to you is, what words of encouragement do you have, or words of advice do you have that you live by that could help other LGBTQI+ people?
I guess it would be, I would want to say something that speaks to when I felt like I was loneliest. Like I remember when I had my first relationship with a guy. I knew it would happen, but I was always sort of like waiting for the right one to come along, where I cared so much that I cared so much about the person that I didn't care. I think the advice would just be like, always know that like however you're feeling, like you're not the only person in the world who feels like that. And that actually ties into addiction. It ties into imposter syndrome. Like any feeling that you have where you feel like you're the only person going through it, know that like countless other people have, and that you're not terminally unique in your experience. And a good way to combat that is, you know, professional mental health, friends with an empathetic ear, mentors have worked for me my whole life, social workers, teachers, family members. Like there's always somebody. Some of us are blessed with awesome parents who we can look up to, and a lot of us aren't. So you have to kind of like do the work. And I think that's what's really so freaking cool about being part of our, you know, I like to call it recently a population, because by a community, I feel like we're like separate from the population. And as an LGBTQIA+ population, we don't have the traditional mentors that a lot of like cisgendered straight people did in like media and in pop culture. And that may be kind of like daunting and scary at times, but the cool thing about that is that we get to seek those out and we get to create what that is, because that in essence is what a logical versus biological family is. It's chosen.
That's true. And thank you so much for being here. Antoni's Cookbook, Antoni in the Kitchen, comes out September 9th in all your bookstores. You can get on Amazon if you don't want to leave your house. I'm Joseph Shepard. You can follow me on everything social, Joseph A. Shepard. And this is
Antoni. Thanks, guys.
Bye.